Hello and welcome to another edition of the Cardinal News Update. I'm Tom Landon from Blue Ridge PBS. Cardinal News Update is a co-production of Blue Ridge PBS Echo and Cardinal News. And joining me today is Megan Schnabel, who is a business reporter for Cardinal News. And Megan, before we get started, first of all, it's good to see you again. But second of all, can you just tell folks a little bit about Cardinal News? This may be their first exposure to it.
Sure, Tom. Thanks for having me today. So Cardinal News is an online, nonprofit, independent news source. We launched back in September, and we cover Southwest and Southside Virginia, trying to tell some of the stories that aren't getting told otherwise. It's a part of the state that's rich with news, and we're just trying to get some of it out there.
That's great. And I encourage everybody to go to cardinalnews.org online and get signed up for your newsletter. I read it every morning and I find it to be really helpful. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a report that recently came out. You did some reporting on it for Cardinal about solar output in the Commonwealth. And can you just tell me a little bit about the report that spawned your reporting and also sort of what its significance might be?
Sure. So, we had been seeing for some time now reports in local media across parts of the state, especially in Southside and the Piedmont areas, about plans for large solar farms that are in the works. And the state of Virginia, in conjunction with the Weldon Cooper Center at the University of Virginia, recently conducted the first ever Virginia Solar Survey. Prior to that, the state didn't really have a good way to know exactly what was going on solar-wise across the state. There wasn't a single repository for information about how many projects were in the works and what localities' thoughts were about these projects. So the solar survey, which was released in April, found that over the past year, the potential solar output in Virginia has doubled, and it's really a pretty significant increase. It went from 30 gigawatt hours in 2015, so going back a few years, 30 gigawatt hours to almost 3,700 gigawatt hours in 2021. Between 2020 and 2021, it more than doubled. So we're looking at a very significant increase.
Yeah, that's what's amazing is that just in 1 year it's doubled. And this is mainly dealing with the sort of the industrial level solar generation. And that's not the same, is it, as sort of distributed solar, which is what people have on their houses maybe?
Right. Yeah. So that number counts both. It looks both at what you mentioned, distributed solar, which is what you think about if you're driving through town and you see solar panels on someone's roof or maybe on a business roof. But really, most of the solar in Virginia is still coming from utility scale solar projects. These are what are often called solar farms. They might be hundreds, even thousands of acres of solar panels. Virginia at the end of 2021 had 51 of these utility scale solar farms. And that compares to 0 at the end of 2015.
One thing that's interesting to me about this is that compared to like planning to build a gas or a coal or a nuclear power plant, I mean, the fact that they can go from 0 to that many in just 1 year, I assume that the projection looks like it's going to continue rising.
It does. So if you go back a few years, as we said, in 2015, there weren't any of these large solar farms in Virginia. I think most people, when they thought of big solar facilities, you would think of out west in the desert, where you would just see acres and acres of these solar farms. But over the years, the price of constructing these facilities went way down, and demand has gone way up for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of Fortune 500 companies are focusing more and more on getting away from fossil fuels and moving more toward renewable energy. And so you have companies like Amazon and Facebook that are building these massive data centers that need a lot of power, and they are looking more towards solar. So as those things have happened, these companies have looked more to other markets, like along the East Coast. In Virginia, in 2020, that was a big turning point because the General Assembly passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Prior to that, there had been some growth in solar farms across the state, but this act mandates that by the middle of the century, both Appalachian Power and Dominion Energy get totally away from fossil fuel energy. So they will have to rely completely on solar and wind and other renewable sources. Um, and the act also sets a goal for the state as a whole of having 16,000 megawatts of solar power as a goal. So after that, after the passage of that act, we have really seen a lot more interest in these mega facilities.
Where in the state, I know not every place is as conducive to this kind of large scale solar farms. I saw one, I think in your reporting, it said that, or it might have been in one of Dwayne's editorials, but it was talking about a 21,000 acre solar farm or something crazy. To
Yeah.
me, I mean, it's not crazy, but it's just the scale of it is kind of mind blowing. Where are we seeing the growth of these solar farms being constructed?
The one you mentioned, the 21,000 acres, is in Charlotte County. Um, we're seeing these large solar facilities mostly across South Side and up through the Piedmont. And that is for a couple of reasons. One is that the terrain is conducive to these big facilities. They need, relatively flat to rolling land. It's harder to build these things on rough, ragged terrain. There's land that is available for relatively low costs. And another factor is the availability of large transmission lines that run through the area. These solar facilities have to be sited close to existing access to the grid, otherwise, it's not really efficient.
Right. And what does that mean for some of our, the neediest communities in our region, which are in far Southwest Virginia, in some cases in places where land has been reclaimed that is relatively flat? Are there prospects for some solar things to happen in far Southwest Virginia?
Interestingly, just last fall, a coalition of the Nature Conservancy and Dominion Energy announced a large solar project on some reclaimed mine land in Wise and Dickinson counties. Um, that has been touted as both a very interesting partnership between two entities you wouldn't necessarily think of working together, and also, a possibility for reusing some of these brownfields. Um, some of the folks I talked to said, yes, it's a great idea. It can be more challenging than what it might sound. The land has to be right, in addition to the topography. If the land is too compacted when they start, they can't really install some of the equipment that's necessary. But it's definitely something that has caught a lot of people's eyes. And there's been a push, especially among conservation groups, to really encourage more development on land that isn't currently being used for agriculture or forestry.
And that brings me to kind of my last question. I know in some of these agricultural areas, some of which are tobacco farming places that have seen decline anyway, but I know there has been a growing resistance to some of these big projects in some of the places where they are probably most likely to be profitable. What do you know about that, and kind of what's behind that resistance, and what's the status of it?
Going back to that 21,000 acre project that you mentioned in Charlotte County, I think part of the issue is that a lot of localities haven't really thought about this kind of land use in the past. Every county is required by the state to have a comprehensive plan that lays out sort of longer term goals for that locality. It would talk about what's important. What does that county think is important for future growth? And very few, this Virginia Solar Survey that I mentioned earlier found that really relatively few localities across the state address the issue of solar in their comprehensive plans. And so localities like Charlotte County are suddenly being faced with the question of, what do we do with this proposal for a 21,000 acre solar facility? Only about 3,000 acres of that would actually be under panel, but it's still raising lots of questions about um, how to use land. Should prime farmland be converted to solar? Should we cut down trees for solar? And also, interestingly, you find environmental and conservation groups on both sides of this question too. You have people saying, well, we really need to move away from reliance on fossil fuels, but at the same time, do we want to be cutting down forests to make it happen?
Right, right. And I guess it's just a matter of what's the funny thing is to me is that you don't hear a lot of objection when a Walmart goes in and they pave a massive amount of parking space, taking it out of productive use for farming as well. But I do understand that if you're used to living in a farming community, people making their living from farming, and then you take this land out of use. Just as we wrap up, what are you following as this goes forward? What are the interesting questions in your mind as you think about how to keep following this story?
It's going to be really interesting to me to see how localities continue to wrestle with this question. In Charlotte County, the Planning Commission just recently recommended approval of this large solar farm. It goes to another public hearing in June. So I suspect there will be a lot of continued opposition arising at that, as well as people supporting it. Something we didn't mention is the whole issue of land rights. If you're a farmer and you own hundreds of acres and you don't really want to farm anymore, maybe because you're getting older or maybe because it doesn't make financial sense, should you be able to do with your land whatever you want? So that's an issue that's also come up in Charlotte County that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Also, we've seen down in far southwest in Wise and Dickinson counties, there is a pilot project that's going to be installing solar on a number of schools down in that part of the state. That's going to start this summer. So it's going to be really interesting to watch if that project expands and to see if more local governments and local school districts want to take advantage of the ability to get some of their power from solar panels on their own roofs.
The cost of electricity is a significant cost for local school divisions and local governments. So very interesting. All right, well, Megan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us for Cardinal News Update. And please, you can watch this anytime on demand. I hope that folks will do that. Also, please go to cardinalnews.org, subscribe to their email newsletter, and please go to blueridgepbs.org/echo to follow our progress here with the Cardinal News Update. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Tom.